Hello everybody and welcome back to Howard Horror. Before we get into today's video, I would just like to say thank you for all of the support and feedback on the channel. I have a whole new setup for audio and I hope you can already hear the difference. Keep up with the feedback. I love hearing from all of you. And if you enjoyed the video, I would really appreciate a like and a comment as it helps with the algorithm. Now let's finally get into it. Now for today's video, we're going to be covering the disappearance of 26 children in one of the most horrifying mass kidnappings ever to occur in America. As usual, this video contains disturbing content, so keep that in mind before continuing. And now, this is the 1976 Chowchilla mass kidnapping. Our story begins with Frank Edward Ray, also known as Ed. He was born on February 26, 1921. His parents were young and in love. Traveling the world, they had decided to move to Chowchilla, California when Ed was young. They wanted him to have the opportunities, and they believed these would be found in Chowchilla. Ed had a normal upbringing. He graduated high school in 1940. Not knowing what he wanted to do with his life and wanting to stay close to home, Ed purchased a nearby farm. He grew corn, raised cattle for a long time, until the feeling that something was just missing from his life. Ever since Ed was young, he had always helped his community, so it made sense that in the early 1950s, when he became a bus driver for the Chowchilla local school district, this sense of helping the community was what Ed was missing in his life. He had it all until his life changed entirely one fateful day. The ages of the kids on Ed's route vary between the youngest being 5 and the oldest being 14, and despite the varied ages of the kids, they all respected Ed, and some even liked him. On July 15, 1976, the day was hot, sunny, a normal day on Ed's route. He was driving the kids home from their second day in summer school. As Ed traveled through the familiar wooded road on Chowchilla, he approached the first of his stops. He slowed his approach as he noticed in the middle of the road there was this strange white van, almost sideways. Then as he got closer, he saw another white van off to the side of the first. At first glance, it seemed like the first van had some sort of engine malfunction and the second was there just to provide assistance. And Ed, being Ed with how much he loved his community, was happy to stop just in front of the van to look over for the owner to see if he could provide some help. And when the bus came to a full stop, 3 men, all armed, swing the back door of the van out, jump out, guns raised, and in that instant, Ed's stomach dropped as he realized what was happening. All 3 were armed and boasted ski masks to hide their identities. Before Ed had even the chance to do anything, all 3 men boarded the bus and one pushed his gun to the side of Ed's head. He quietly leaned in and said to his ear, "Move away from the steering wheel without any trouble, or I'll shoot you." Ed, with hands raised, slowly slinks out of the chair and is forced to sit by a child. Now, with one of the armed men in the driver's seat and the 2 other gunmen keeping watch on the bus, it slowly rolled out to its unknown destination. Ed and the 26 children on his bus were now hostages. Seconds later, the 3 armed men took all of the children and forced them into the vans one by one. When they were all inside, the gunman slams the first door shut. Then he moves on to the second, slams that one shut. It was pitch black in both. They felt the movement, and they could tell they were back on the move. But where to? At this point, they can't even see each other. When Ed's eyes adjusted to the dark, he could barely make out his watch, and he kept track of how long their journey was. Without stopping, food, or water, they traveled 11 hours in total darkness in the back of the vans. During the journey, the younger kids started to panic, cry, and even throw up from motion sickness. And the big kids would try and comfort them by singing songs, and at this point, Ed is really losing it. He's doing almost worse than some of the young children. Now, 11 hours later, it was 3:30 in the morning, and the moon was out. and the gunman had taken the kids to Livermore Quarry, nearly 100 miles from where they were abducted. So now, the gunman swung open the doors, and one by one, the armed men stopped each child, getting their full name and taking one piece of clothing from each of them. To Ed's surprise, they continued to push them deeper into the quarry. And as they were moving forward, Ed noticed at one point he wasn't standing on ground anymore. He was standing on a moving truck that had been buried 12 feet in the ground. The only visible part that wasn't covered in soil was the roof of the van. And in the center, there was a hole with a ladder that descended deep into the van. Then it clicked. Ed realized they were all going into the van in the ground. One by one, they were forced into the van, and the horror built with each person that descended into the van. Inside of the moving truck, there was a large amount of bare, dirty mattresses. The walls and ceilings had wire reinforcement, and even containers filled with cereal, peanut butter, and strange food items. And lastly, large jugs of water covered in filth. Ed looked around before he could even look up, a steel plate slid over the hole they entered through, shrouding them in darkness. Then they heard the continuous thump of dirt being thrown on the top of the truck. If it hadn't already dawned on them, it definitely did now. They were being buried alive. Some children began to scream. One even fainted. Ed was trying his hardest to keep them calm, but it was so hard because he himself was terrified and his fear was taking over his body. Like the children. Then Ed started crying along with them. He was sure the roof would collapse at any minute due to the weight of the earth on them. The air in the van grew thin and all hope was almost lost, but then that's when a hero emerged. The oldest boy in the group, age 14 at the time, Mike Marshall, jumps up and he yells, "I am not going to die without at least trying to get out." And this snaps Ed out of his trance of fear. Then he stood up and started commanding the older boys to help as they planned on what they were going to do to try and get out. The boys, along with Ed, grabbed all the mattresses they could and stacked them on top of each other, making a tower until it was tall enough for someone to stand on top and reach the roof. Then they got to the top, and that's when the younger children took turns handing them wooden pieces from the bed frame that they were using to wedge between the manhole blocking the exit and the very bottom of the truck. And that's when they realized the roof was sagging, just as Ed feared. So they pushed on the plate with this wooden beam with all of their might, and then they realized that the plate was being weighed down by some heavy object, and in fact, it was 2 tractor batteries on top, which could weigh over 200 pounds. The gunmen had precautions in case they tried to escape. As they kept working on that plate, they were getting weaker and weaker due to heat exhaustion and muscle fatigue, as they hadn't eaten or drank in over a day. Their hope dwindled as the roof continued to cave in on them, but with one last well-timed push along with the roof collapsing, the plate moved in a miracle, and they finally saw light. Ed lifts one of the boys out through the hole and told him, "Clear as much dirt as you can to make it easier for the rest of us." And that's what he did. And then one by one, Ed raised the kids out through the hole to safety. After they cleared enough dirt as they could from the entrance, Ed lifted each kid one by one to freedom. And just like that, nearly 16 hours later, Ed and all 26 kids were above ground and safe. Ed and the children made their way to a guard shack at the quarry in an effort to locate help. They ran into a night guard, and although he was very confused, he called the police and waited with the group until their arrival. The investigation into who the gunmen were and their goal did not take long to solve. Whoever was responsible had to have had access to the quarry for long amounts of time to bury the van. And not long after making that connection, they took 24-year-old Frederick Newhall Woods IV into custody, as he was the son of the owner of the quarry. Once they had Frederick, it didn't take long to round up 2 of his accomplices, and they were James and Richard Schoenfield. And when they had all 3, their motive became clear as day. Despite all three coming from wealthy families, they all fell into deep debt and they were in desperate need of money, so they took 27 hostages in an attempt to get ransom money for their release. So they kidnapped the children, they planned to phone the families to tell them of the situation, but all the families were busy phoning the police, so they decided to wait a day to call because the phone lines were clogged. And in the time they waited, they horrifically saw on the news all 27 hostages had actually managed to escape and were safe despite the precautions that they had. When they went to trial, all three pled guilty to kidnapping and for ransom, and all three were sentenced to life with the possibility for parole. In 2012, Richard Schoenfield was released from prison, and in 2015, James was paroled. But on the other hand, Frederick had been continuously denied parole over the years, and he still remains in prison. Despite all 27 hostages making it out safe and sound, they're still haunted to the day with the traumatic memory of being kidnapped and buried alive. Alright everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. This has been Howard Horror. And also, please let me know how the audio sounds. We have a whole new setup here at Howard Horror, and it should sound 10 times better. And if you like the video, a like and a subscribe would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for watching, and as usual, have a great day.